Well, if you've been around me very long, you've heard this story before. You've heard me preach about it. It was a life-changing event in my life. It was a major milestone in my life. It was a horrendous spiritual lesson for me in my life. And so I've told it over and over again, particularly when it was appropriate to tell somebody that was struggling with God's will versus their will and wanting to do something that perhaps God didn't want them to do. And we're in chapter 19 of the book of Genesis. You remember that Lot is in Sodom and Gomorrah. Strangers have come, which are actually angels, messengers of God, and they've come to take him out safely. And we know that his son-in-laws didn't believe, and as a result, they perished in Sodom and Gomorrah. His wife, we know as we look through this particular section of Scripture, was told not to look back, but she did, and she turned into a pillar of salt, and that's where you hear most of the messages in this particular section of Scripture. But I want you to see the exchange that occurred between the angels and Lot. I want you to see their specific instructions. I want you to see Lot's argument with them, and then I want you to see the outcome. And then I'll tell you the rest of the story. As Gabriel Heater used to say, we'll see the rest of the story. So let's take a look. Chapter 19, verses 17 through 20. When they had brought them outside, he said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, and you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please let me escape there. Is it not small, that my life may be saved?" Now the instructions couldn't have been any clearer. He said, don't stay anywhere in the valley. Go to the mountains. And first of all, I want you to notice that Lot says, "No, my lords." You've heard me say it before. You can't say no and Lord all in the same phrase. If these were representatives of God, if these were angels that had come for Lot, you don't say no to the words that the angels have brought, because they're God's words. He says, "No, I can't stay here, but I'd like to stay in this little town called Zor." You'll find that in verse 22. "I'll be destroyed. I'll die. I've got to go over to Zor. This is an important thing to me, and please allow me to go to Zor. Allow me to go to the valleys where you said don't stay, and not go to the mountains." And of course in verse 26 we find that even though the instructions were given not to look back, Lot's wife looked back. There's only one reason that we should look back, and that's to learn from the past. We can't change the past, but we can learn from the past. Every appearance is that Lot's wife was looking back with fondness towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Now remember, her family's with her. So she's looking back at a place that was evil and wicked, a place where she should want to put behind her. Now, nevertheless, I want you to see one verse, verse 30, as a result of Lot's argument with these angels, and then I'll tell you the rest of the story. Lot went up from Zor and stayed in the mountains, his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zor, and he stayed in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. You remember in verse 18, Lot thought he knew what was best for him. He wanted to go to Zor so bad. And yet it tells us just a couple of verses that Lot feared for his life in Zor, and he fled to the cave in the mountains where the angels had wanted him to go to start with. So what's the rest of the story? Well, back in the late 60s and in the early 70s, I was very unhappy in Florida. I wanted to move to North Carolina so bad I could taste it. I sent out hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes trying to change jobs. I had a good job. I had a very good job. I enjoyed what I was doing where I was, but I wanted to go to North Carolina so bad. I thought I knew what was best for me, and it had to be North Carolina. And after hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes, I finally had the opportunity to move to North Carolina. I moved to North Carolina in 1973. In July. Do you remember what happened in 1974? Well, actually, it happened towards the end of 1973. Gas shortages, economy, inflation going out of sight, and the job that I went to wasn't going to work out. And I applied for hundreds of jobs in North Carolina to try to stay there. Meanwhile, back in West Palm Beach, Florida, where I wanted to get away from so badly, my old company was begging me to come back. In a downturning economy, they still were begging me to come back. They offered me more money, better benefits, bridging the gap in the time that I'd been gone. And after trying as hard as I could to stay in North Carolina, I was afraid for my life and my family's life, and I fled back to Florida. Now think about it for a minute. Florida's in the plains. I wanted to go to the mountains. I forced my will on God and I went to the mountains, almost in his permissive will. He said, okay, I'll let you go to the mountains, but remember, that's not what's important. What's important is that you're in the center of my will. And I fled from the mountains back to the plains that I thought I hated so much. Looking back, I can learn from that experience. Looking back, I see that I stepped outside of God's will. He had me right where he wanted me. I delayed for more than 6 months what his plan was for my life because I thought I knew what was best for my life. But he knew what was best for my life. Some of the best days of my life occurred because I went back to Florida where he wanted me to start with. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a wonderful day.